IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Prateek, and today I have with me Meera and Shubhika from CIS, and we're going to be talking about a recent essay that they've written on lateral surveillance. Meera, Shubhika, thanks guys for joining us. Why don't you first introduce yourselves and then we'll dive right in.
Thank you, Prateek. Hi, everyone. My name is Meera. I've been working as a policy officer in the Center for Internet and Society for over a year. Initially, I started working on AI and regulation and then privacy and gender, and now I'm working on lateral surveillance.
Hi everyone, I'm Shubhika. I'm in my final year in law, and in the past 3 months I've been interning with CIS, particularly working very closely with Meera on projects which are related to lateral surveillance and trying to explore how this new form of surveillance will open more avenues for research and also surveillance in the country currently.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, it's interesting, right? So this essay that you both have written about lateral surveillance, for the benefit of our listeners, right? Can you sort of explain what that is? Because when I was reading it, I pictured something like Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, but instead of one central guard tower, you have many things. Everyone watching over everyone, right? Sort of this collective snitch culture, or the telescreen from 1984, but just that instead of one ministry watching it, everyone is watching everyone else. So my mind was racing with those sort of wild ideas. But for the benefit of our listeners, why don't you sort of explain what lateral surveillance is, where it comes from?
Yeah, so I feel like all forms of surveillance relationships have an element of power, but in traditional surveillance relationships, of course, the conventional form, there is a power hierarchy between the state and the citizens, right? But what lateral surveillance is that it is a form of surveillance where one person is looking out for another person, and which is a mutual relationships. So lateral surveillance usually applies to neighborhood areas, right? Because you're one citizen who's living in your house, you have the capability and the ability to look out for the other citizen who's living in the other house. So lateral surveillance has relationships which is more mutual in nature, and there's no direct power hierarchy between like the state and the citizens. So you're usually keeping an eye on the other, and the watcher and the person who's being watched are at the same level. And this peer-to-peer surveillance has a lot of emotional objectives, right? So it has things like community building, or like you're strengthening a relationship between people in the community or in the neighborhood, etc. So this tool of surveillance mechanism is used through like emotional factors so that it's strengthened. Lateral surveillance itself had started using in like 1980s when there were neighborhood watch schemes. So in 1980s America, when neighborhood citizens were encouraged in order to take responsibility for detecting and preventing crime in the neighborhoods, etc. So you have the local law enforcement authority, but they will appoint people from the community to make sure that things like crime prevention and like you can watch on each other, etc. So it was started back then. And I think a lot of literature was developed by Mark Andrewick and Janet Chen, which even Shubhika can go on.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? So it was, as Meera said, in the 1980s and the 1990s, one could see the application of lateral surveillance happening through neighborhood watch programs. However, the term in itself, which was particularly, can attribute the term to Mark Andrewick in his work on the work of watching one another. He says how lateral surveillance, risk and governance sort of intersect with each other, and the power relationship, as Meera explained, sort of becomes mutual and one person is watching another. So when you say surveillance in general means watching over another, so you would say that there is someone sitting over someone else. However, in lateral surveillance, it is just one person, people at the same level looking at each other, and how there was more literature on how social media, so to say, also increases the scope for lateral surveillance and how increases more people wanting to have social control over others or control over the lives of others and wanting to watch how their lives move. So that is how other terms like surveillance has emerged, and the whole concept of social surveillance has emerged. And in terms of other literature, which basically explains the impact of lateral surveillance, Janet Chan's work sort of tells us as to how it develops an environment and a society wherein there is eternal vigilance and constant suspicion. And what happened in this case is that though there are emotional factors like trust and building healthy communities, which are considered, which are told to us or citizens as main objectives of these neighborhood watch programs or other lateral surveillance initiatives, particularly without the use of technology, which was happening then in the 1990s. Now it is so that it has been technologized and there is no use of technology, and we see how lateral surveillance works there. And that is something where research has not gone in much depth, but has not shown much. But one could sort of interpret as to how this eternal vigilance and constant suspicion is continued, and what it does is that it increases a perceived threat in the minds of individuals, and how if I am watching over someone, I will always be suspicious of the other person's behavior, and I will not take any sort of a behavior which is not per se normal as per societal standards, and I will continue to look at it as I will continue to have that suspicion in my mind that how this other person may at any point act in any manner which may not be normal. And what this ultimately does is it increases instances of xenophobia or prejudice or discrimination or intolerance, which is something which is currently also being seen in the COVID-19 pandemic situation in India or worldwide, which we've also discussed in the essay. So I think we'll come to that later.
Yeah, we will. So I just want to go back to one point. I think this point of suspicion and that culture is important. But just going back to what you mentioned about social media, right? And I find that interesting as well, because if you look at the way people put out their lives, everything they're doing, minute details about their lives on social media, right? You're permanently on, or not permanently, but a lot of people live on broadcast mode, as such, right? Yeah. So how do you sort of reconcile the two? Just curious, what do you guys think of that?
So I think the perfect example to how social media was used, particularly in terms of lateral surveillance, was what happened in Korea, right? So the thing is, there was a gay nightclub, wherein the day after the partying had happened, there were a cluster of positive coronavirus cases that had released. After that, what happened is that an air of homophobia and hatred spread against the LGBTQIA community. Now, how social media plays into that role is that because of that, people were now very, very sensitive about putting about their sexuality or their information online. So, in fact, there were instances which this reporter from Korea pointed out where even in dating site apps, people just remove their sexuality or people just remove their photos, etc., or anything that is indicative of it. So, this is where social media plays a role because your freedom of speech and expression is completely curtailed. Because the minute if an air of, say, homophobia or any form of racism is out there, the first point of control you will do is to ensure that you will not set out an image which can showcase your vulnerability. So this is how I think mostly it plays a role because the culture of surveillance not just is in the air but also on social media, because a lot of your personal information, within your name, where you stay, even the area, right, even the community. For example, after in Korea, this information had come out. A community where a lot of LGBTQI community stayed were also very, very careful about how they present themselves on social media. A lot of them didn't even inform the authorities when they had to come check. A lot of them had given fake names, fake identities, and things like that. So I think this is where the example of how social media can be effective in your personal life can play.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because yes, like you said, you're basically then creating incentives for people to put out, to either withhold information or not provide you with the right information, which is contrary to what you're setting out to do. Right, and so and you also mentioned in your essay, you also mentioned the "See Something, Say Something" campaign, right? Which I thought was interesting because in many ways, I think for years after that, we continued to see the effects of that, right? Where you have people being taken off aircraft just because they happen to be speaking in Arabic or something.
Correct.
Something like that, right? So so they have a lasting effect as well. These sort of campaigns.
Yeah.
You also touched on the COVID-19 aspect. We want to get into that, but if you were going to add something to that point, please go ahead.
No, about to see something, say something, and this is where I think even Shubhika can come in, is what happens is you're privatizing law enforcement, right? You're giving the power to citizens in order to be watchful and be more suspicious about something. See, it's one thing where you feel like, okay, this is wrong, I will complain. But once the air of suspicion is created, you will complain for anything that you feel is wrong. Which is where a culture of xenophobia and racism comes into place, because at least right now, after COVID-19 specifically, anyone from the Northeastern community and anyone from, say, China, etc., are going to be subjected to so much amount of racism because you're literally looking for things to be afraid of.
So that's the thing. In terms of the consequences of lateral surveillance, as Meera said, it basically what it does is that since citizens are being empowered by technology or by whatever means to look over others, what happens is that they try to be more vigilant and they want to look out for behaviors which are not which do not fit in their own perception of being okay. And what this does is, this is exactly what I mean. I think now I'd actually take it to COVID-19 as to how we've mentioned examples of people in India itself. Like yesterday itself, I was reading this article on BBC which said that the stickers of quarantine which were put in Delhi, and they were also put in certain other states of people being home quarantined, and how that was attracting a lot of criticism, and also the pictures of those houses being circulated on WhatsApp as if those houses or that particular information was public property. And even the fact that the government of Karnataka released a PDF with names, which they later said was a mistake. But I mean, if you look at other states which have released PDFs, the whole point of this is that they are just encouraging more people to come out and ask for these this sort of information, so that they can be more vigilant. So it only encourages this sort of behavior of asking for more information, and then it becomes a vicious circle and becomes a loop wherein people want to know more, and the moment they know more, they sort of try to make this sort of a gated community, which is a term which has been mentioned in literatures which deal with the consequences of data surveillance. They say that there's a gated community which is created, wherein you don't want to let any person in who does not fit in that community. And then it all goes back to forms of discrimination coming up, or xenophobia, or for that matter, in India. I mean, there was an article on Wire which is also being mentioned, which talks about how roots of social distancing are actually very much in line with caste hierarchies and untouchability, which has been practiced in India for so long. So I think this sort of a practice will only revive that culture and make it more difficult for people to feel included, and sort of further an inclusive community, which is something which I think we have to be looking forward to.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah, because the thing that sort of struck me also was when this episode happened with the Karnataka government, right? I think they'd made a microsite as well, where I think they had put up the addresses of 19,000 people, and they called it social pressure, right? I think that was it was. I found that term very interesting, right? Social pressure, and then the justification given was that two or three people violated their quarantine. They were found, I think, shopping or something like that, and that led to a whole sort of. It basically, it's a classic moral panic kind of scenario, right? And then you have more people, like you said, more people asking for more information. Even now, in fact, when you look at all the App Store reviews for a number of these quarantine apps that came out, there are a lot of positive reviews in the sense that, hey, this is a great initiative, or people asking for more information saying that, hey, I can't see exactly who is infected, right? So it sort of goes back into the point that you were making, that the more you do this, you further breed that culture.
Yeah, and I think social pressure is very interesting, right? Because social pressure is the biggest hindrance to any legal relief. By that I mean, like, all these concepts of informed consent or choice I have to download the app or not completely evades away when there is social pressure. So that is the problem with these apps. I think they've already met the objective of it when they released it in the first place. Because people will now feel the social pressure to download it, whether or not the privacy policy makes it mandatory, or whether or not, like, there are government orders that make it mandatory. They've already met their objective by releasing it in the first place. And I mean, of course, till last week, I mean, I think even a lot of places still Arogya Setu is mandatory, right? Whether you have to travel in Delhi Metro, or even through private citizens, in like resident welfare associations, in which they come to your house and they check whether you have Arogya Setu or not, or through airline travel, etc. So social pressure definitely plays the biggest hindrance for any legal relief which is available.
Just a small point. Adding to that point, I mean, if you look at Arogya Setu's branding for that matter, and if you open the app and you surf through the first few screens, it says it is your responsibility, your social responsibility to have the app in order to prevent others from having, or just sort of playing your role in the society. So that is another problematic thing in terms of how it's branded. They are branding it as something which is important and which is mandatory and will help the society without giving us the requisite privacy protection for that matter.
Exactly. So no matter how many protocols now that gets released, or no matter how many clarifications about the app that's been released on how your data is used, etc., the damage is already done, because people will now download it like inevitably, because they're told to, because they said that in order to fit in, you have to follow what the others are doing. And all of this is termed as a binary, because you have to side with public health and not your privacy, and there's nothing in between.
Yeah, and it already got more than 100 million downloads, right? I think that's the number that they're claiming. So yeah, a lot of people clearly either trust it or have given into the social pressure aspect of it. The other thing that you guys touch on also is the data protection bill, right? And that's an interesting one, because the way I see it, I think in its current draft, even if we had the data protection bill, this is, I think, a perfect case for all the exemptions that the government has been granted, and for them to invoke that clause. I think it's clause 35, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the government exemption. It's 35, correct.
Yeah, that also going to be interesting to watch out for.
Yes, absolutely. See, of course, under 35, you have the government exemption, wherein the government can direct any agency to collect information whichever it sees as necessary or appropriate in nature. But any exemption clause, of course, gives wide enough powers to the government to direct any agency to collect information, etc. So there is always the threat of the data which is collected by these apps releasing to the third party, right? And this is why I think even Shubhika writes in her part in the article saying that how there should be better privacy protecting principles, which could be a possible solution in order to have a more positive effect of lateral surveillance.
Exactly. So, I mean, on that part, when you talk about third parties having access to it, like even if you see the protocol as has been written very in much detail by Internet Freedom Foundation, and how the protocol is not sufficient, they talk about how on a strictly necessary basis, any third party can be given access to the data, and also for research purposes, how the access can be provided. Now, completely agree that they say that there are proper safeguards and there will be anonymization of data when it is shared. But here, when talking about the potential for lateral surveillance or potential for leakages happening, it is important to note that lateral surveillance currently may not be happening through these acts. But the fact, like, Just for example, the fact that these apps provide you with information, like I would actually want to take the example of Corona Watch, the Karnataka government app, which was initially one of the most sophisticated apps even before Arogya Setu had come up. It was showing a heat map wherein it was providing one with a proper timestamp as to if this particular person has been tested positive. Had been tested positive, it will provide you a timestamp that this person was present at this particular area at this particular point last, and say at that particular point if the lockdown was in force and there were probably just about 10 or 12 people present at that point, it is very easy for anyone to point out, or anyone to probably figure who that person was, or where that in which locality that person could have been present. So that is the problem, which is we try to highlight that there is a very high potential of leakages happening, and very high potential if you make this app, like if you make the data available in any form to any third party, it is not going to help. It is only going to, like, the aspect of commercialization of data which is happening will further the aspect of data surveillance happening, that any person in any area can possibly de-anonymize the data, or can possibly have some access to personal information of any individual, and that is the problem.
I was just trying to say, I think it's very interesting, right? Because in order to prevent the harms of lateral surveillance, you also need to dilute traditional surveillance, right? So it's both correlated in a certain way.
In the sense that a culture of surveillance just breeds more surveillance.
No, I mean to say, like, if through traditional surveillance, if you have like better privacy protecting principles applied to your applications, etc., which is a traditional surveillance, which is assuming that the government is now collecting your data. Okay, the minute you dilate it to concepts like, okay, no, we will not have so many safeguards, we will make sure that the privacy policies are vague, etc. So whenever these things happen, your traditional surveillance is further it further becomes more harmful, which again increases more lateral surveillance. So I'm saying both of them are connected in certain way. If you make traditional surveillance a little bit more diluted, by which I mean that you make your privacy policies better, you have more privacy protecting principles, then you also ensure lateral surveillance isn't affected.
Because in this scenario, the scope for lateral surveillance essentially stems from how there could be leakages, or there could be more data available with the public. And how is it that the data is available with the public? Because currently it is only the government which has access to so much data, right? Because only if there is not enough privacy protection, there is not enough safeguards, will the data be prone to leakage. And the moment it is prone to leakage, it means it's available in public. It means that more and more personal information is available with the public, and then is when lateral surveillance starts. So the path to lateral surveillance essentially is from traditional surveillance. So the more traditional surveillance you undertake, the more general culture of surveillance you encourage, and the more general culture of surveillance you encourage, the more people would want to know more. So then lateral surveillance creeps.
Yeah, it reminds me of those, all the quarantine patients' addresses going out on WhatsApp groups, right? And not all of them were released by the government. I think a lot of them actually were leaks that someone had shared. I can somehow I can see the person's point also, because I think sometimes you think that, okay, they think, oh, this might be helpful to people, right? Without realizing the risk of such an action. The other thing I noticed at that time was a lot of people who opposed that also then forwarding that information, saying that, things like, oh, why are people sharing this? Or, hey, this is the link to the Karnataka government website. Why has this been put up? And I found that very strange, because it's a societal thing to that extent, right? Now you can also talk a bit about potential solution, right? Let's go into that.
So like one of it is, of course, already we've discussed it before, which is to have a rule of law and implementation of privacy principles in traditional forms of surveillance, which would then ensure that lateral surveillance isn't furthered. The next one I speak about is the positive initiatives of which ensures a bettering of mental health of citizens. Now, this concept actually, Janet Chan, when she speaks about, she was like, I understand that lateral surveillance exists, but it can be turned on top of its head to ensure that, the positive aspect of it can come through. By that even she means that you have a culture of mutual trust and care which is created in the society. So that can be ensured in a lot of ways. Right now, if government is implementing an app, why don't you also have something which is helping for counseling? So if you have quarantined persons, instead of asking them to send one selfie per hour, if you have a counselor sitting behind where they can talk to about how they feel, etc., you also ensure directly you are ensuring that you care for their mental health, and also are creating an environment where you're ensuring that people mutually trust and care for each other. So another example which I can think of is in England. What had happened is that they used this innovative placard system where in their neighborhoods, say a house where only old people stay, they put a placard outside the house saying red, for example, which means that they don't have enough groceries. So any person in that community goes to buy groceries, buys even groceries for this house, which is red, etc. So this way, you're not alienating them. You're not treating patients or people who are quarantined as criminals. You're ensuring that, okay, we have to get through this together, but through like proper mutual trust and care amongst each other. So since we're introducing this concept, these were the two solutions we can think of. But I'm sure once the discussion of lateral surveillance is out in the air, there'll be more and more solutions that can come forth. But like at least while drafting the solution itself, we reached a point where we realized that we can't completely stop it, but we can ensure that some benefit out of it can come.
Agreed. And on that positive note, looking forward to more research on this topic and taking this conversation further.
Yeah.
We'll wrap up here. Thanks for joining us, guys.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Guys, it's been a really, really cool week. We've had a ton of interesting stuff come out. We had an episode with Kunal Shah on Cyrus Says. We've had really stellar episodes on Pesa Vesa, Advertising is Dead, Filter Coffee Podcast, on Empowering Series, all over the place. Definitely do check it out. I'm sure you'll enjoy what's been going on this week. And thanks for listening, and we hope to catch you again next week.
Are you constantly seeking happiness? Wondering how to make the most of every day? How not to let your inhibitions stop you from achieving your goals? It's now time to get your A game on. It's time to unlock your true potential. Tune in to the Empowering series with me, Zarina Poonawalla, to feel empowered in all genres of life. From behavioral skills to management skills. From health to relationships. From mental well-being to emotional well-being. And of course, your finances. I've got you covered. With these tips and tricks from me, Zarina, and true life stories from my amazing guests, you're bound to bring your purest to the table. Tune in to the Empowering series with Zarina Poonawalla every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.